continued to work on my relationship with Laura, to find all the residual items of unforgiveness and look at them differently. By then, we were friends again. Once the divorce was final, we both had cast aside any issues enough to stay in touch with each other. In one of the sessions with Julie, I went back to my time with Laura. As the images had become more epic, I could allow my imagination to no longer limit how something could be resolved within me. I gave myself permission to create the most fantastical images and sequences without questioning their validity. The scale. Forged of iron, cast thousands of years ago, the weighing scale is at least 600 feet high and built into the outer skin of a massive cliff. It hangs there, embedded into the mountain. There are two gigantic arms with small platforms on either side, each just big enough for one person to stand on. The arm upon which I am perched lies at least 150 feet below the fulcrum. The sheer drop of the cliff, disappearing into nothingness below, evokes a sense of being suspended in mid-air. I look up. Way above me I can see the other platform. Laura stands on it. The fog around me feels cold against my skin. I can see that Laura's side of the scale is in bright sunlight. I look down. A thick rope tied to the underside of my platform disappears into the clouds below. I'm almost certain that something is attached to the other end of the rope, something heavy, something that holds my part of the scale down. I am certain that should the rope and whatever attached to it be released, my end of the scale would come up and the two platforms would equalize. I have to get down there and see what's on the other end of the rope, I think to myself as I start climbing. The rope is thick and covered in green, slimy algae. The platform is now above me, disappearing fast as I slide down the rope. Right now I can't see anything other than fog and the cold green rope in my hands. It is as if I glide through cotton balls. There's stillness and an absence of any kind of sound. I wonder for a moment how I will ever get back up when suddenly my legs lose contact with the rope. I slow down and see that the rope has ended. I now hang on its last foot. Nothing at all is attached to its end. I realize that I have to get back up, but I know that I'll inevitably fall. My hands slide downward. Fear of falling from this height turns my stomach into a knot. I try to hold on to the rope, but to no avail. As I fall, I know that it is the rope that is letting go of me and not me of the rope. I have no choice in this. I fall into the clouds, faster and faster until I land with a big thump in a huge pile of leaves. As I look up, I see my sister standing there in the grass near me. I'm in Germany, in a park inside a castle wall overlooking the city I grew up in. My sister looks at me for a moment. Then she helps me up and gives me a big hug. After a long time, she says, "It's okay now. I'm okay now. I'm fine. You are too." I can feel her words resonating within me. They're warm and comforting like a blanket and a fire on a cold night. And then it clicks. When our parents divorced, when I was 11 and my sister was 6, our separation from one another had more impact than I had been able to look at previously. For some reason, I always thought I had to keep her up in the sun, make sure she's okay, and make sure she's safe somehow. Meanwhile, even if I was down in the shadows, that was fine with me. "You're okay now, and I am too," she seemed to be telling me. "We're both okay." She gives me another hug. A strong sense of relief washes over me. Then suddenly I'm back on the platform of the scale. My part is still in darkness, in the shadows, and Laura still stands on the upper platform. I know what I have to do. I have to loosen the rope. I kneel down, untie the knot, and watch it fall into nothingness. I stand up. Slowly, almost unnoticeably at first, the massive scale begins to move, and my end of it is being lifted upward, while Laura's part moves down. We are still about 300 feet apart, but we are now slowly leveling off. Eventually, the two arms of the scale equal out. It is exactly at that position of the scale and only at that precise moment where it is very easy to step off. In fact, this is the only position where both can step off the scale entirely. And that's what we do. I step off. All the way on the other end, Laura simultaneously steps off as well. We stand each on our own side, still about 300 feet apart, but connected through two walkways that meet a few hundred feet in front of us. I start walking, so does Laura. As I walk, I look back. The massive scale rests in perfect equilibrium. Behind it and way below lies a vast, open, flat desert, a magnificent sight. As I turn in the direction I'm walking, I see that there is grass around me. The path I walk on leads through lawns, green, cared-for lawns. I can see the point where the two paths meet. I walk toward it and arrive there. So does Laura. From here, the path leads into the mountains, gently moving upward, visibly for miles until it disappears from sight. Looks good, I think. Not so bad after all, Laura says. You go ahead, I'll stay here for a while, I'll tell her. She nods and starts to walk, and I watch her disappear behind a curve further down the path. As I stand there, I suddenly hear a low crackling, splitting sound behind me. I turn. At that moment, cracks appear in the stone before me. Gaps emerge, getting bigger and bigger until the massive scale breaks off the mountain where it stood for thousands of years. With a thunderous sound, it breaks, separating from the cliff, and after hanging suspended for an endless moment, it disappears into nothingness. The cliff is now 10 feet away from me, and there's only one direction to go, only one path to follow. Where I had found safety for so long, on a scale comparing or sacrificing myself to others, there's now just an empty space. With no sense to stand there anymore, I turn, my eyes fixed on the path before me. One step, and another, and another. The scale was a significant piece in the puzzle for me, as it also brought my sister back into the healing circle. We had been in touch over the years on parallel journeys, albeit 3,000 miles apart, our process intertwining at certain points in time. Still, overall, I always had the feeling that we were on the same path. This process helped us reconnect and deepen our relationship and communication. And there's always more to forgive, more to let go. We never know what thoughts and beliefs within us hold us back, and all that's required is to open the doors to our mind and heart. Yet we crave letting the sun shine on the barren grounds, letting forgiveness comfort and heal us, even when we can't admit it, even to ourselves. As the Course states, miracles fall like drops of healing rain from heaven on a dry and dusty world where starved and thirsty creatures come to die. Now they have water, now the world is green, and everywhere the signs of life spring up to show that what is born can never die, for what has life has immortality. A Course in Miracles, Workbook, Part 2, 13.5, 1-4. The scale also marked another change in my relationship with Laura. We were equals now. At least a natural balance between us had been restored. I was able to come up from the shadows, and she was no longer afraid to come down from her point higher up. I think that we enter most relationships out of a lack, a belief we are not good enough and only the other person can fill that lack. That lack can also be described as a wound on our soul. We use the other person usually as a bandage, but underneath the wound still festers and grows, having been deprived of the healing light of the sun. However, this very same relationship can also serve the purpose of healing the wound. But we are the ones who have to be willing to change the purpose of the relationship from covering up the wound to healing it. Changing the purpose of a relationship is usually a painful process. That's why we don't do it more often. What we do instead, and what I found myself doing over and over, is to substitute one bad bandage for another. However, the time with Laura, even though we separated, was ultimately for healing, not for creating a deeper wound. One of the more important insights from my work with the Course is that whether a relationship is healed or not doesn't have anything to do with what happens on the outside. When Laura and I first split up, I thought I had failed, spiritually and otherwise, for not being able to stay with her. I know now that kind of limited thinking can be a trap. The important thing is that the other person is always a part of us, not a part, but a part. If we have a strong urge to cut the other off, that just means there's a part within us we want to get rid of. Laura and my relationship was healed in the end, for there's very little left other than love now. Laura never did anything small. When she was pissed, she was really pissed. When she was funny, she was hilarious. She didn't take any BS from anyone, not even from Jesus. Laura has since died. In 2014, she left this earth the same way she lived, on her own terms, in full control of her destiny. She was a person of high integrity that never faltered throughout all of her struggles. I can't but think that Jesus was there to pick her up, leading her to her next classroom. Until we meet again, my old friend. Yet all who meet will someday meet again, for it is the destiny of all relationships to become holy. A Course in Miracles, Manual for Teachers 346. In this next piece, I hoped to capture a moment when I was transported into a different realm. The line I heard within me, "You are perfect," isn't with regard to my life or my physical appearance, nor is it about me as I regard myself. It comes from a completely different vantage point that I have struggled to accurately describe. You are perfect. It happened on one of my recent evening walks, down the beautiful country road near my house, alongside a meandering stream passing a pond that was completely still at that time of day. The sun was just about to set, spilling its warm light into the trees behind me. As I walked, I thought about my life and all the things I had done and all the things I did not do. The projects I started and never finished, the relationships that came and went, things I could have done differently. I should have gone to college, I think often. Actually, I did go to college and stopped about 15 credits before graduation. I will finish one day, I was telling myself. I wasn't unhappy in general, but there was this nagging feeling that I should have done something more with my life. Something substantial, something accountable. I felt that I lived uncomfortably far below my potential. As I looked at the constant stream of thoughts that seemed to come out of nowhere as part of an endless chain of disturbing truths about myself, I suddenly, as if opening a door, had a completely different thought. This one seemed very quiet, like the still pond at the end of my road. It didn't move, it stayed, it radiated, like a butterfly on an aircraft carrier. Amidst the chaos that was my conscious mind, it stood. You are perfect, I heard again. These words did not contradict all the other thoughts. They completely eliminated them altogether without leaving a trace. You are perfect. The power of this simple statement brought tears to my eyes. I started to sob. Walking down the quiet road, my dog sniffing the ground next to me, I couldn't stop crying. I felt the absolute truth of this statement. I knew at that moment that it was true, that this was in fact the only truth about myself. The joy that accompanied it, the utter relief that whatever I had thought about myself prior had no meaning at all, made me weep. Don't change anything about yourself, for if you do, you are denying that you are perfect, and you will give your thoughts a reality they do not have. Do not change anything, for if you do, you forget that there's nothing in you that needs to change. This episode lasted about 2 minutes before the others came back. 20 F-15 fighter jets landed on the aircraft carrier, completely unaware of the butterfly. The sound, in contrast, was deafening. The butterfly, however, wasn't even aware of them. Quietly and unmistakably, he continued his song, "You are perfect." Who will I listen to? Who do I listen to? What do I want to believe about myself? What voice do I allow entrance into my mind? There are but two, and only one of them is true. What followed were a few pieces that had to do with Jesus directly. In those, Jesus changed from his 2,000-year-old outfit of robe and sandals to a more contemporary and fashionable style with sunglasses and a button-down shirt. Get up. I kneel alone on one of the wooden knee benches in a small dark chapel. My hands are folded. I'm deeply immersed in prayer, quietly and very sincerely reciting line after line of scripture. I'm wearing a robe and worn sandals. As I kneel facing the altar, the door in the back opens and a figure walks toward me. I turn to see that it is Jesus. He stops next to my pew. I think that he might want to sit next to me and pray, but instead he says, "Get up." He doesn't command harshly, but the authority in his voice is unmistakable. "Get up," he says again, and as he steps away, giving me space to step into the aisle. As I step out, still confused over what this is all about, he turns. "Shall we?" He puts his hand on my shoulder as we walk toward the entrance. As he opens the door, I realize for an instant how dark the chapel was. For now, the light blinds me and I close my eyes for a few seconds. As the light diminishes, loud traffic noises force me to open my eyes again. I find myself on a very busy sidewalk in Manhattan, in a crowd of pedestrians. Jesus, now dressed in a designer suit and carrying a brown leather suitcase, walks next to me. "We're going to a meeting," he says, as I look at his hair bound into a ponytail. He does look like a chic businessman, slick, tanned, and confident. Ray-Ban sunglasses, the suit is probably Armani. "Where are we going?" I ask. "It's right here," he answers, as we turn toward the building. Just as we enter the front door, I can see the logo above the entrance, NBC. "We're going to a meeting with NBC," I think to myself. "Yes, we are." "Yes, we are," he answers. "It might be better if you let me do all the talking, as I'm the one who knows the business," he tells me, an amused smile on his face. "And what business would that be?" I ask. "The business of people," he answers as we enter the elevator. Inside the elevator, I look at myself in the mirror. Suit, tie, black and polished shoes. Pretty cool, I think to myself. "I thought you might like the outfit," Jesus answers my thoughts with a smile. The door opens and we step into a large room, a reception area. Leather couches, a coffee table, a receptionist behind a desk. "You may go right in," the woman tells us in a very friendly voice and demeanor, though we haven't introduced ourselves, as if she also knows he needs no introduction. "First room on the left. I'll let them know you're coming." So we walk down the hallway to a door that is being opened as we approach it. "Good morning, everyone," Jesus says confidently, opening the conversation. We sit down at a large table. On the other side of it sit 5 or 6 men in suits that I presume are executives. "Shall we?" asks one of them vaguely. "Sure," Jesus answers while opening his briefcase and sliding it over to them. One of the executives takes out what looks like a screenplay. Then another and yet another. There are 4 in all. I see what those are scripts I had written over time. They nod, put them back into a suitcase, and hand over an envelope. Jesus takes it and opens it. He nods, then gives it to me. "Thank you," he says. We get up. "We're done," he tells me. "Okay," I answer, still flustered as we leave the room. In the elevator, he says, "That went well, don't you think?" "Yeah," I reply, still stunned, holding the envelope in my hands. "Don't spend it all at once," he cautions. As I open it, I realize that he probably meant it. On the check is written $1 million and 0 cents. This to me had meaning on several levels, but mostly it was an answer to my wish to solve an internal conflict I had become aware of. The next story should clarify it a little bit more. Ready? I walk barefoot on a deserted beach along the edge of the water. The sun sits golden on its surface, covering it like a blanket. The heat of the day still emanates from the fine sand under my feet. I don't know how long I had been walking when suddenly a voice next to me says, "You've come a long way." I look over and see Jesus walking beside me. He's tanned, dressed in Tommy Bahama shorts and a sort of old-fashioned Hawaiian shirt. His hair is wet and he looks as if he had just taken a swim. "The water's terrific, isn't it?" he exclaims cheerfully while putting on his Ray-Ban sunglasses. My number one problem, I realize at that moment, is that I can't integrate my spiritual life revolving around my relationship with him with also being in the world, really being in it, in relationships with money, career, this body, my hopes, my dreams, my joys, etc. I somehow think that I can't have all this here if I really want to be with him. I feel terribly guilty sometimes, so much so that I swear I create my own failure with things here just to tell him, "See, I don't care so much about the world, I just care about you." That's a bit silly, don't you think? His calm yet firm voice interrupts my thought process. I have overcome the world. That is why you should be of good cheer. I don't need martyrs, but I do need teachers, and good ones. The world is in a slump, and it needs people that are in it, fully in it, in relationships, in careers, with money, and with dreams and hopes and fears. I don't choose my channels lightly. Okay, stop talking now, so I can process what you said, I think to myself. There is no world, he continues. So why not enjoy your life while you believe that there is one? It's not so serious, you know. There's nothing to do except to accept my love. Your work lies solely in understanding that there's no work for you to do. As long as you think you have work to do, spiritually, I mean, you don't understand me and what I can be to you. I need you to go out there and be happy. I need you to be my ambassador, my agent, if you will, my voice, my embodiment. There aren't that many who can reach me directly. Obviously, those are not the ones who need my help through you. But there are more than enough, who search for me and have no way of accessing the part of their mind where I abide. So you, my old friend, my loving brother, you are the way for me to reach some of them, and for some of them to reach me. You always wanted a purpose in life. You asked for it many times. How is this one for starters? It comes with my total care package as well. You take care of whoever I send to you, and in return, I'll take care of you. You can even have a girlfriend and a house and a car and enough money and whatever it is your heart desires. After a little while, I realized that he had stopped walking. I stop as well and turn toward him. Ready? He says. It took a long time for me to solve the issue of being in this world fully engaged, yet maintain a thread of connection to him and his world. My conclusion is that the conflict between the material world and the spiritual world lies solely in our minds. To abandon this world entirely, perhaps become a monk or a nun in a monastery somewhere, is one path of spiritual awakening. It's not mine. To work on my issues, I need to have that mirror reflecting back to me what's going on in my mind. The world is the mirror of my thoughts. In it, I can see my own state of mind reflected back to me. If I want to escape the world, what I really want is to escape what's in my mind, projected outward. The darkness I see in the world is the darkness in my mind. The world is neutral, and if I forgive my projections, it will become a place of light. Helen Schuckman, after taking down the course, wrote a series of poems that were published after her death. The book is called The Gifts of God, named after a prose poem in the book that was dictated in the same way the course was. The rest of the poems were, according to Helen, more of a collaboration between her and Jesus, whereas that particular prose poem was dictated in full. There's a passage I'm including here that is one of my favorites. I sometimes wish I could accept what Jesus has to offer, but know that I must wait upon myself to be ready for it. This is my offering. A quiet world with gentle ordering and kindly thought, alive with hope and radiant in joy, without the smallest bitterness of fear upon its loveliness. Accept this now, for I have waited long to give this gift to you. I offer it in place of fear and all the gifts that fear has given you. Can you choose otherwise when all the world is standing breathless, waiting on your choice? Come now to me, and we will go to God. There's no way that we can go alone, but when we come together, there can be no way in which the word of God can fail. For his the word that makes you one in him, and mine the voice that speaks this word to you. Helen Schuckman, The Gifts of God. This passage became to me the epitome of what Jesus wants for us. If you like poetry and spirituality, The Gifts of God is a truly amazing collection of poems. Speaking of poems, this next one also touches on the frog into a prince theme. I've never been very engaged politically, but particularly moved by President Obama's inauguration speech of 2009. So much so that it inspired a poem that had to do with Jesus, as everything I wrote did, one way or another. In this case, the call to greatness is the call from him to us, reminding us of our true function, which is love. Opposing this love is our fear of it, but as we are only love, we literally only fear ourselves. I remember the moment I wrote this. I was sitting at the table in my kitchen. The sun streamed through the window, leaving an ever-changing pattern of shadows and lights on the floor. I had watched the speech before and thought about the call within us, the call that reminds us of who and what we are in truth. The call to greatness. The call to greatness, ever present, lifts us up to higher ground, calls us to our highest purpose, freedom's choice, no longer bound. We will meet it either trembling or with steady, resting hand, for we cannot hide forever from our destiny's command. Our oath has not been broken, our promise is still our word. From afar our truth has spoken, all through time has it been heard. Here I stand on ground made holy by this ancient symphony, as I reach for my own glory, for my Father's company. There, with cold and bloodless fingers, darkened veil and evil sense, grips my heart, my throat, and lingers, fear employed for my defense. Fear of death has lost its power and its ever-present threat. It is not the great deceiver, but my greatness that I dread. Should I dare to leave my smallness and my littleness behind, should I forfeit my own blindness for a vision that is kind? And then one day, maybe not this day, and maybe not even tomorrow, but one day I know it for sure, my friend, we will exchange joy for our sorrow. That day will come, and it will be the day when we take a deep breath and we pick ourselves up and we dust ourselves off, and with outstretched fingers we touch the face of God. The next piece, called The Great Escape, describes my attempt to escape from the prison of the ego thought system, especially guilt, one of its main inhabitants. It came out of one of Julie's sessions. The Great Escape. I stand in a large, empty and dark dining hall of what must be a vast, centuries-old castle. I'm aware of the worn and ancient stone floor beneath my bare feet. Only seconds after I enter the scene, a large, dark-armored knight grabs me, lifts me up by the collar as if I'm weightless, and pushes me against the wall. His face is distorted and shows utter fury as he screams at me in complete rage. His scream is low and deep and powerful. I know he's about to kill me. Even though there are no words coming out of his mouth, I understand what he's telling me. You have betrayed us. We were there for you and you have betrayed us. You can't leave now. Behind him I see a group of 5 or 6 knights wearing the same dark armor. They all have faces that look like a distorted version of myself. I'm absolutely terrified. There's nothing I can do. I feel completely powerless. Until I hear a doorbell ringing. Ding dong. The modern sound is completely out of place in these ancient halls. I look toward the door. You can't leave us now, the knight screams, and then all the knights shout different things at me. You're unworthy. You should be ashamed of yourself, traitor. One whispers, never forget you are the home of evil, darkness, and sin. I remember now why I am in this great hall. At the other end of it is a massive oak door. It leads to the outside. I was about to escape. This is not a castle, it's a prison. And I get the sense that I've been here for eons. I also know who stands outside that door ringing the doorbell. He's an old friend of mine. The huge knight lets go of me and I slide down the wall onto the floor. The others surround me, each screaming at me, pinning me against the wall with their sheer might of their voices. All I can do is turn my head and look toward the door. There is freedom, I think. No, there's death, one of them shouts. You will die the moment you step through that door. I believed this last line especially for too long. Since time began, I have lived in these halls. Lifetimes ago, as it seems, I lived in a room at the other end of the castle. I slept. I slept for an eternity. And then into the dream came a sound, unidentifiable at first, and I slept for many more centuries until I heard it more clearly. A doorbell. The faintest sound of a doorbell, its sweet melody reaching my ears through the thick walls and long hallways of the castle. In time, I was able to stay up a little longer after each ring before I went back to sleep. I was utterly afraid to open my eyes, and once I did, I saw nothing but plain, thick walls surrounding my cell. Years later, as it seems, I found the courage to open the door. Fear was my constant companion. I didn't open the door for such a long time, mainly because of the promise I made since I fled here to hide. The promise was simple. Never leave this darkened tomb. Never question my friends, and never question that I needed to be in here in the first place. But one day I opened the door and I stepped outside my room into a long hallway. I started to walk and soon lost myself within the labyrinth of passages and hallways that seemed to lead to nowhere. Once in a while, I would hear the doorbell, faint and distant. Sometimes I thought it was just a memory, too long gone to be remembered. But then, when I had almost forgotten its sweet sound, it rang again. For the longest time, I walked the dark hallways, holding on to the smallest bit of hope that I would find my way out one day. And then suddenly I found myself in the large dining hall. Its ceiling was at least 80 feet high, and it spanned a football field in length. On the other side, all the way on the other end, there was a door. I could see beams of light seeping through the small gaps in the ancient wood panels. Behind the door was freedom. "You will die if you leave here," the knight's voice pushes into my mind. "Stay with us and you are safe. Go outside and you will be annihilated." "No," I say quietly. Into the silence, following the first word I spoke since time began, into this silence that was quieter than stillness, the doorbell rings again. Its sound echoes through the darkness and into rooms forever hidden from the light. "I have to go now," I hear myself say. "Too long have I been a prisoner. Too long have I denied a beloved son to a most loving father. I have to leave this tomb." I feel a strong pull from the door now. I can feel waves of love coming from the outside, radiating through it and enveloping me in its warm embrace. I walk through the hall and through thunderous screams as I look into faces begging me to stay. I cannot. Not anymore. I reach the door and open it. My old friend stands on the other side, smiling at me. "I'm glad you could make it this time." "Me too," I say, "me too." I close the door, and the deafening sound is quieted at once. Stillness reaches my mind. Before us, a valley stretches out into infinity. A path extends toward the horizon. A small brook runs happily alongside. The sun has just risen. The tall grasses on each side of the path reflect its golden light. I feel as if a heavy burden has finally been lifted. I can breathe freely now. The air is fresh and clean and warm and filled with summer's perfume. Our final journey has just begun. The old friend is, of course, Jesus. This is interesting in retrospect because Jesus, by our design, is really not allowed inside the walls of the ego mind. He has to wait outside. He can't overpower our decision. He says in the Course that if he were to let himself in, if he were to change our minds without our invitation, he would violate the basic law of cause and effect. As teaching this law to us is his main function, he must wait until we listen to his gentle knocking on the door of our minds. The call, his call, is ever present. I can sometimes feel it very clearly within me. I can also very clearly feel my resistance against it. In one sense, that's truly the only work we need to do, to hear the call and to become aware of the tremendous resistance we have to answer it. It's funny, as a major part of any great story arc is, as Joseph Campbell so beautifully elucidated in The Hero's Journey, the call to adventure, and its subsequent refusal of the call. At first, the hero of any journey refuses the call. That becomes too painful, and at some point, usually toward the end of the first act, the hero will concede and accept his calling. The adventure begins. If Jesus is our teacher, his presence within our minds reminds us of the truth about ourselves. This truth is very hard to accept. As the Course says, this is the truth. At first to be said, and then repeated many times, and next to be accepted as but partially true, with many reservations. Then to be considered seriously more and more, and finally accepted as the truth. A Course in Miracles Workbook, Lesson 284, 1, 5-6.